we're going to put your questions now on the government's plans to deport asylum seekers to Rwanda to our panel of experts. And to answer those questions, I'm joined tonight by Kevin Saunders, who's a former Chief Immigration Officer for UK Border Force in Calais, James Wilson, who's the Deputy Director of Detention Action, one of the groups that's been challenging the deportation policy through the courts, and Sophie Lucas, who's a solicitor involved with a legal challenge on behalf of refugees. So welcome all three of you at our panel tonight, fielding these questions from our audience. Let me kick off with the first question we've got here, and this is from Paul, who says, what has the European courts got to do with the UK, let alone deciding what we do with the refugees that bypass several other countries to get here? That's the first question from Tom. So, Sophie, to you first of all, how is it that late last night, European court did block this flight when it had been cleared by other UK courts? That's what's behind Paul's question, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I think it's important to be clear, firstly, that the European Court of Human Rights is completely separate to the European Union. It is a court responsible for applying the European Convention on Human Rights, which Winston Churchill helped to draft and signed in 1950 in the aftermath of World War II. And it protects the basic rights of around 850 million people. But importantly, the European Convention on Human Rights is incorporated into UK domestic law through the Human Rights Act. And it was the UK's domestic court, which upheld the European Court of Human Rights' decision to grant an interim measure. So to answer Paul's question, the UK can and do decide their refugee policies, but they have to comply with the laws that we've signed up to. That's how the rule of law works.
But they are respecting those laws, aren't they? Has Strasbourg got any particular concerns?
Strasbourg's concern was that the Memorandum of Understanding between the UK and Rwanda is a series of aspirational assurances, and it's not legally binding. So Strasbourg's concern was that if individuals are sent to Rwanda before the determination of these legal issues, there is no legally enforceable mechanism by which they can return to the UK if the policy is found to be unlawful.
OK, so Kevin, what do you make of that? That Strasbourg was worried about this commitment to return those refugees that have been sent out to Rwanda should the policy be deemed to not be lawful?
Right, yes, good evening. I think the problem with the European Court was that they decided that they would put more weight on the evidence given by the United Nations barristers than the UK courts did. And once the European Court had decided along these lines, and once they had said that one of the people was not going to go, shouldn't go on the flight, the UK court had no option but to follow suit, which is why they didn't go. So it's fairly straightforward there then.
OK, so let's move on then to our next question, shall we? And this was from Tom, who sent this question. He said, how can it make sense to schedule these flights before the judicial review of the entire policy is complete? James, what do you make of that? Because there is this judicial review, which we're due to get the results of in July. Does it make sense to you to have waited until then? Might that have got the government out of these legal issues?
Yes. Hi, good evening. Yes, I mean, behind the question, we are one of the co-claimants of that claim and have been of the injunction interim relief request in the last few days in the High Court. And absolutely, what we've been saying in court and outside court in the last few days is that there shouldn't be any removals taking place to Rwanda until that hearing has happened. Absolutely, we don't believe it's a lawful policy, but that needs to be tested fully in the courts, and we feel it's an uncontroversial request that no one is removed until that has been established, because we have such serious concerns.
Kevin, what do you make of that? I mean, obviously the government is very keen to get started on this policy. They want to deter the people traffickers from bringing people across the Channel and making that dangerous journey, so they wanted to crack on with it. But do you think that was sensible? They've admitted themselves they anticipated some legal challenges. Do you think they should have waited?
No, I mean, Lord Justice Singh actually said in his hearing that there was nothing wrong with removing the people to Rwanda. And I think our friend from Detention Action will know that Lord Justice Singh actually said he wasn't going to hear any more of these, of any more of the appeals, because he said in law there was absolutely nothing wrong with the decision of Mr. Jonathan Swift. So there was no reason why they couldn't have been removed. I believe that Lord Justice Singh also added that if the judicial review, which is going to be heard in July, and then the result would come out 6 to 8 weeks later, so there's going to be quite a long period here, there would be a requirement for the UK to bring these people back if the judgment went against the government. So there was no reason why these people couldn't have gone in the first instance.
Sophie, what do you make of that? And also looking ahead to that judicial review, if it does find that the policy is legal, what then? Will that satisfy Strasbourg?
Well, with respect, Kevin, that's not actually accurate. Lord Justice Singh did not say that there was nothing wrong with removing people to Rwanda. That was not the remit of his decision. He upheld the decision of the High Court, which was that there were some risks in sending people to Rwanda, but that given the short period of time, those flights could commence. But there has been to date no decision on the lawfulness of this removal policy. And I think that's really important that the Secretary of State has proceeded with the policy. And we're now in a situation where £500,000 of taxpayers' money was wasted last night because the flight could not lawfully proceed, and this was predictable. To answer your question, Anna, this final judicial review hearing is scheduled to take place at some point in July, and that will determine the legal issues, and that will determine whether this policy can be implemented lawfully.
OK, and let's just get a little bit more detail as well. From Jerome has asked this question. Does this policy of shipping migrants to Rwanda comply with the 1951 Geneva Convention? Sophie, I'll come back to you as the lawyer on this, whether you can answer that question.
Yeah, of course. In short, no, we don't believe that it does, for two reasons. Firstly, Article 33 of the Refugee Convention prohibits refoulement, which is expelling individuals to a country where they may suffer irreparable harm. The UNHCR, who are experts on the grounds and have constitutional oversight of the Refugee Convention, have serious concerns that asylum seekers sent to Rwanda may be sent back to countries such as Afghanistan, Syria, Eritrea, in breach of that article under the Refugee Convention. And secondly, Article 31 of the Refugee Convention prohibits the penalisation of refugees based on their unlawful entry. And the premise of this policy is to target individuals who have arrived in the UK via dangerous means. And this, we believe, is also in contravention of that article, because the drafters of the Refugee Convention recognise that there is no legal obligation on asylum seekers to claim in any certain country.
But James, there'll be a lot of people watching who'll be confused then, because they'll say, why did the High Court clear these flights to take off? They were quite happy that those refugees would be able to leave on that flight on Tuesday.
I wasn't quite clear on the question. Why did the High Court feel that was possible?
To clear the flights.
Well, I mean, clearly in the end, and thankfully from our point of view, the European Court have felt differently, and that those removals shouldn't happen until there is a decision on the substantive case. I think something that came out in court was the point that theoretically that people removed at this point could be returned to the UK in a number of weeks' time when the substantive legal proceedings have completed. But I think that ignores firstly the fact there may be many weeks until we're at that stage. The administration of bringing people back from Rwanda to the UK might well not be straightforward. And probably most fundamentally, we're extremely concerned for the well-being of the people removed to Rwanda in the meantime, the immediate impact on their mental health and well-being, living, and also the risk, as Sophie mentioned, of refoulement, of their being refused asylum in Rwanda quite quickly and potentially returned to the very country they have fled from, putting them at risk of persecution, trafficking, and indeed risk to their life.
Well, we have had another question kind of that relates to this actually on Twitter. Why did the government choose Rwanda? Kevin, do you want to pick up on some of the points there that James has made? Do you have any concerns about the fact that it's Rwanda that's been chosen? The Home Secretary, Priti Patel, has said today in the House of Commons that the country's been terribly misrepresented. She says it has an excellent record on refugees. The Rwandan government has said, give us a chance. What do you think?
Yes, this is quite interesting actually, because both your other guests are saying that the flights are not lawful because of the Human Rights Act, which says you can't send people to a country which is dodgy, if you like. But the government's argument is that Rwanda isn't like that, and in fact, the evidence is that over 100,000 people from different parts of Africa have gone to Rwanda at different stages as a result of civil war in Africa and been placed there by the UN. So on one hand, the UN are saying, well, it's not a problem because we've sent people there. And on the other hand, our two guests are saying it is a problem.
James?
So there you are.
OK, James, do you want to come back on that?
Yes, I mean, I think it's important to note, firstly, how rare the UNHCR's intervention in a case like this actually is. They intervened in our support in the hearing on Friday and the appeal on Monday to emphasise their view that the asylum system is not robust, it's not fit for purpose, and that the assurances that they have been quoted as giving by the UK government just do not apply. That is very rare. They would not have raised those concerns unless they felt them very seriously. I mean, we have concerns both about the general human rights record of the Rwandan government, for example, its treatment of opposition politicians and the LGBTQI plus community. But also, I think a really key point here is because the asylum system is just not robust, it's just not fit for purpose, there is a very real risk of people being returned from Rwanda to another country where they will be at risk of persecution or further harm. That's a crucial point.
Sophie, what do you make of this? Because the UN has approved the sending of refugees to Rwanda in the past, hasn't it?
Well, I think we need to be really clear on this, that the UNHCR has expertise on the ground. It is not the case that the UN has supported any scheme similar to this. The schemes where they have been instrumental are emergency transit schemes. So that is where individuals have been fleeing another country in sub-Saharan Africa and have transited through Rwanda, usually voluntarily, and then often resettled to another country. So this is not the case that the UN has authorised or supported any similar schemes. I don't know where the evidence that Kevin is citing is from, because the evidence we have from the UNHCR, which, as I say, the Home Office is recognised as the expert on the ground, is that there are serious concerns that fundamental human rights will not be upheld in Rwanda. And a typical example of that is refoulement of refugees very recently, and in 2018, the killing of 12 refugees in Rwanda as a result of protesting their conditions.
Kevin, do you want to respond there?
Well, I mean, we're never going to agree on this, are we? My information, my evidence is that that's perhaps not completely true. Rwanda is a country that prides itself on law and order. I can't comment about the 12 deaths. I don't know anything about it whatsoever. So I can't comment on that. What I do know is that people from civil war, in particular from Niger, have been, and the UN have actually placed them there. So it's something that we're not going to agree on, is it?
OK, let's move on, shall we? Sophie, I can see you want to come in. I think we're going to try and move on because we've got lots of people's questions to cover here. And the next question is about what happens in Rwanda. This is Sarah's question. the government is paying until October for these refugees' accommodation. What happens after that? What's the plan, assuming any actually do go to Rwanda? Are you able to help us, James, with what the government's plans are?
I'm not an expert on that particular aspect, on the plans after that. I mean, I think it's important to say, as was said earlier, that the problem here is it's very unclear what the longer term plan is. This is not a question where this is not a situation where we are in some way outsourcing our asylum system, where people are going to Rwanda, going to have their asylum claim heard, and then will be returned to the UK if they're recognised as a refugee. It's very much a one-way ticket, and the MOU is aspirational. It's very questionable how binding, if at all, it actually is. So I think it's very unclear, and it seems very unclear as to whether Rwanda has the capacity to take the large numbers that, at least in theory, the Home Office say that they are intending to send people. So I think there's a lot of immediate practical concerns there, as well as the ongoing concerns about what will eventually happen to those asylum seekers.
And Kevin, are you happy with the fact that if these asylum seekers have their cases processed in Rwanda and found that they do indeed have a case, they don't actually come back to the UK, they stay in Rwanda? Do you think that's fair?
That's quite reasonable, yes. I don't have any problem with that at all. In answer to the previous question that you asked, James, the government has undertaken to support them for 5 years in Rwanda.
OK, thanks for clearing that bit up. And let's also move on to another question, which we've had kind of variations of this, a few variations of this. This is from Robert. Can't these migrants apply for asylum in either France, Italy, or whichever other country they land in, and then, once they're a member of the European Union, apply lawfully for British citizenship? Sophie, what are the options for people who perhaps wanted to end up in the UK but are passing through safe countries on the way there? A lot of people are asking questions about why they don't apply for refugee status in those countries.
Well, firstly, asylum seekers have no legal obligation to claim asylum in any particular country. I think it's important to note that most of them do claim asylum in the first safe country that they reach after they flee their country of origin. But just imagine for a moment that you are an Afghan in Kabul in August last year, a Ukrainian in Kiev in February, March this year. Your entire life is destroyed before your eyes, and you speak English, or you have close family in the UK, or you've served the UK government or the British Army in some way. There are really valid reasons why people are desperate to come to the UK, and it's worth noting that these other European countries mentioned by the questioner, Italy, France, Spain, Germany, take substantially higher numbers of asylum seekers than we do.
Well, yes, in fact, the next question is about that. It's from Mark, saying, do we have comparable figures for the numbers of refugees or asylum seekers crossing into, he says, Greece and Italy by boat this year, and also numbers seeking asylum in countries such as Germany? So pick up on that if you can, James, before we get back to that general issue about what the best course of action is for these people seeking help. How do the figures compare?
Yeah, and I think just picking up from Sophie's answer, and I completely agree with Sophie's points. And I think it's important to bear in mind, to keep things in perspective, in that most asylum seekers don't reach Europe to start with, and when they do reach Europe, most don't come to the UK. I think we received the 14th highest per head of population number of asylum seekers in 2021. In terms of the numbers of people crossing the Mediterranean, I don't have a figure, I'm afraid, for this year, but it will obviously be substantially higher than the numbers crossing the Channel. I think you're looking to numbers, say last year, I think it was around 55,000 asylum applications to the UK, which was a rise, but is far smaller than even other Northern European countries. I think France had nearly 100,000 applications, Germany nearly 150,000. So we do need to bear those figures in mind.
Kevin, what do you make of that? What do you feel about people wanting to pass through those countries but still persist on coming to the UK? Do you understand some of the reasons that Sophie was pointing out there? What do you make of that?
Well, I mean, Sophie's right. There is nothing in law that says somebody has to claim in the first safe country they come to. On the other hand, it's totally unreasonable to pass through 6, 7, 8, 9 other safe countries just because you fancy coming to the UK. Let's look at France, because this is an area that is often quoted. If you actually look at the asylum seekers that go to France, in the majority, they are people from their old empire. So they're ex-colonial people who are going there in large numbers. Their actual numbers that are coming from the Middle East or that other part of Africa into France is less. It's a lot less. So France is taking the majority of people from their old empire. Now, you've got to remember, France is 2.5 times bigger than the United Kingdom. So you could argue they should be taking 2.5 times more than we are. Germany is a lot bigger and a lot better off than us. So that they can take as many as they like. But if you look at the United Kingdom, actually we are an island. So nobody should be reaching the UK unless we invite them. And this is really the crux of the argument. If we could stop all the illegal immigration and we could clear the 100,000 backlog of asylum claims that are sitting in Croydon, then we could look at taking more people lawfully and regularly from these areas where there's a problem.
Very quickly, Sophie, what are the means of getting... Oh, I can see you waving there, James. You obviously want to answer this question, but what are the legal ways of people getting to the UK? Can you apply for refugee status in those other countries specifically for the UK?
Well, I think, firstly, there are no safe legal routes to come to the UK. The ones that there are, the Ukraine scheme is woefully inadequate. I think Kevin makes two good points. First is that the UK is an island. The implication, therefore, that we have no international obligations to accept any asylum seekers purely because we happen to be an island is nonsense. And secondly, that there are a substantial backlog in asylum seekers awaiting decisions. That is true. And that emphasises the point that this is a problem with the competency of Home Office decision-making and the speed at which these decisions are made. It's not an issue with the numbers arriving. And that's really critical in this discussion.
OK, and let's just finally put Rachel's question to you. She has written to us to say, if we don't have a place to send illegal immigrants and can't send them back to their own country, and people in the UK don't want so many in their areas, what is the answer? It's a very big question to end on. I'm going to put that in your lap, James. What do you make of that?
Well, it is a very big question. I mean, unfortunately, the reality of the global refugee picture is that the number of people who are in refugee-type situations is rising. There are a number of conflicts. There is persecution taking place. Those numbers are going to keep rising probably for the foreseeable future. I think anyone who suggests they've got the answer to the refugee problem globally is not being truthful, because it is incredibly complicated. It requires international cooperation. But a key practical step that the Home Office should be looking at now, in stark contrast to this wrong and unlawful policy that they have been considering, is to pick up on what Sophie mentioned around the lack of safe routes. What we need is safe routes to claim asylum in the UK. Those have actually been taken away. Those have been reduced by the government in the past few years rather than increased. And to pick up on something Kevin said around illegal migration, yeah, I mean, they're only illegal because the Home Office have recently criminalised people for taking a journey that they have no choice but to take because of the lack of safe routes. So that safe routes are the way ahead.
OK, Kevin, would you agree with that? Safe route? I can see you shaking your head, actually. I think you've answered my question there. What do you make of that?
No, I'm sorry. That's just not correct. We have a big problem here in the UK, and I think James is he didn't answer your question either. The problem is that we've got people crossing the Channel in a dangerous manner. They're putting their own lives at risk. We've seen this already. They're putting my former colleagues' lives at risk because we're the ones that have to dig them out of the sea. And this new legislation really helps, because if these people are arriving illegally, throwing away their documents, not telling us who they are,
I am going to stop you. We are out of time. Sorry, Kevin Saunders, Sophie Lucas, James